Greetings. I want to give you a little bit of an overview of Chapter 1, what we'll begin the semester with. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show the textbook as a way to help you understand how to sort of navigate the Pearson eText. So let's share the screen. Here is the Blackboard site. We'll start with the announcements page when you come into Blackboard. If you scroll down on the left side, you'll see the Pearson link to the Pearson MyLab and eText. If you do that, if you click on that, you should see this set of links, and one of them is the Pearson eText. Right. If you click on that, it's going to open up the e-textbook for the course. And you'll see the opening cover. If we go to the side, that'll open up the table of contents. And let's look at our first chapter, Chapter 1. You'll see that the contents are listed down here on the menu. If we open up that first chapter by clicking on the side over here, we can expand all the different sections that are in that chapter. And we can further expand the subsections that are in those chapters. Okay, in this case, Chapter 1. So I'm just going to open up all of those so we can see all the different components that are in that chapter. You can see that Chapter 1 is about an introduction to macroeconomics. And each chapter begins with some learning objectives. Those are useful to understand what it is that you're going to be doing in that chapter. You can actually click on those, right? And that is going to take you to the first part of that's related to that particular learning outcome, that learning objective. So let me go back. Let's go back again though. And so let's just look at the introduction here, and let's open up this first part of the chapter. You can also navigate using these arrows down here. We can go to section 1.1, which is the same. We can also get there with the menu over here. You'll see that the first part of this chapter is what macro is about. I've given you some indication of that in the welcome video, what this course is about. And you can see these bulleted items here in the beginning of the chapter really do go through and what we'll see at the end of the course, and we'll come back to this at that point, you'll see that we're going to cover all of that information during the course, and it really does summarize what macro is about. Right? It's about long-run economic growth. It's about business cycles and unemployment and inflation, the U.S. in relationship to the world economy, and macroeconomic policy. Those are really the key issues. So you can always come back. In this course, everything builds from day one. You can come back to these and look back as we go through the course and get a better understanding of how this provides a preview of what's coming throughout the course and later in the book. So we can go through that and see some data around long-run economic growth, looking at output in the economy. This has to do with real GNP. We'll be looking at GDP primarily, right? And we'll be doing some work in class related to this as well, right? And you'll see other data that's presented in this chapter. In this case, it's labor productivity, and it makes the point that later on we'll be using models to try and explain and predict and understand, evaluate policy, understand the data. So we're always going to be looking at data, we're going to be looking at words, and we're going to later on be looking at models that explain this kind of economic behavior. In the course, we'll also be looking at current events and current data, and not just historical data. So the first part of this is really talking about the long-run growth, and then business cycles. Business cycles, the ups and downs in the economy. One of the key economic variables that we'll be looking at throughout the course, and you'll be reporting on at the end of the course in macroeconomic brief, is the unemployment rate, right? And so there's unemployment data right? And some discussion about that. Inflation data, right? What inflation measures and what that looks like. Here's the consumer price index. It's not actually the inflation rate, it's a percentage change in the consumer price index. We won't be spending a lot of time talking about the international economy in this course, this semester, but there's some data here around exports and imports, the trade deficit of the United States. We'll be talking about that some in chapter 2, actually, but we won't be talking about it a lot throughout the course. And then we move on to macroeconomic policy, the next section in this chapter. And the idea is that the government and the Federal Reserve, which is not part of the government, can use fiscal policy and monetary policy to try and affect the growth of the economy over time, and can try and influence business cycles, the unemployment rate, the inflation rate in the economy. And so we'll be talking about macroeconomic policy throughout the course as well. We've seen that with the coronavirus and the COVID pandemic. We've seen the federal government be very active in the U.S. economy, helping to move the economy out of a recession and into recovery. There's another section in this first part of the chapter talking about how macroeconomics aggregates information across people. And so we don't always look at the details, but we'll be getting into some of the details, especially toward the end of the course. Even as we go along, we'll be breaking out, for example, unemployment rates for different groups, and how the economy affects different people within the economy. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at the whole economy as a whole, and that has to do with the idea of aggregation. So what do macroeconomists do? That's what this is. The next section in chapter 1 is about. So macroeconomic analysis, analyzing things, right? That's one of the key tools that we build up in this course. That's a very marketable tool for employers, right? Macroeconomic research, trying maybe using data and theory and models to try and understand and predict what's happening in the economy. So we'll be developing economic theory, economic models to use along with the data for our macroeconomic analysis. And then there's data development. That's another area. So one of the things that economists do is actually take the data and compare it to the theory, and to see how well the theory matches up. Right? So that's this whole developing and testing an economic theory section of this part of the chapter. And then finally, we have this last section in chapter 1 that defines the idea that's central to macroeconomics, the classical and Keynesian. It looks like Keynesian, but it's Keynesian, right? The Keynesian model, and named after John Maynard Keynes. And there are key assumptions underneath each one of these models that lead us to very different policy conclusions, and in terms of how the economy works, depending which assumption that we adopt. At different points in time, historically, some assumptions with the classical model have worked better, and different times the Keynesian model has worked better. So we'll be looking at both approaches in this course, and understanding the difference between them. Right? So this is the classicals versus Keynesians, and it's useful to get a good understanding of that even now, even though we'll be digging into that a lot more deeply as the course goes on. Right? Because it has big implications for macroeconomic policy, and how we approach macroeconomic policy, not only in the U.S. but across the world. So we'll be developing a model that is able to bring into bear both the classical and the Keynesian model. We'll be able to look at both of those kinds of models in a unified kind of way. And then every chapter has some sort of chapter summary in it, right? That will summarize the main points. It's a useful way to make sure that you understand the material that's in the chapter. And then there'll be key terms in each chapter as well that you can actually go back to, but you should make sure that you understand those key terms. There are review questions and numerical problems, analytical problems, and usually problems working with macroeconomic data. So there are plenty of opportunities for you to practice. We'll be also doing homework exercises that'll be similar to some of these analytical and numerical problems. And you'll be doing reading quizzes before each chapter, which we'll be starting with chapter 1 and chapter 2 with those reading quizzes to also help you understand the material and dig into that material even before we start doing it in class. So that's an overview of the chapter. You'll find one of these overview videos about how to read the chapter, what's covered in the chapter, the big ideas, how to think about them. You'll find one of these videos for each one of the chapters in our textbook.